All right, boys and girls, so today we're going to be looking at this practice, and we're going to practice making equations out of information that has been given to us. And in order to be able to do that, we first need to look at this table and find some relationships. So I'm going to start by reading the top. It starts with number 4, Clarissa. Please make sure you're on the correct side. Clarissa and her friends were making necklaces using stones and beads. The table below shows the relationship between the number of stones and beads used in the necklaces. Which of the statements below are true? So I see that we have a title and we have stones and beads, and as I look at my table, I notice this is a bunk bed style table, which means that we have pieces of information stacked on top of each other. So when I'm glancing over my stones, I notice that the variable that they're going to be using to represent stones is S. So I'm going to go ahead and circle that with my pencil. And then we have the total number of beads, which is going to be represented by the variable B. That's going to be helpful because I'm going to use those variables instead of writing the word stones or beads. Then I look at my numbers and I see that it looks as though we're increasing as we go across both tables. But when I'm looking at relationships, I really want to focus on what is the relationship between the stones and the beads. So I think of the stones as being my input and the beads as being my output. So what am I going to have to do to the stones to get the beads? So I always draw this little arrow to the side, nice and neat, from my input information to my output. Now remember, whatever we decide the rule to be, that number is not going to change. It's going to stay constant. So when I'm looking at this information, I want you to take a couple of seconds and write the relationship that you see. Alright, and let's see if we agree. I see that if I take the number 2 and I multiply it by the number 6, I'm going to get the number 12. If I take the number 3 and I multiply it by the number 6, I'm going to get the total 18. If I take the number 5 and I multiply it by the number 6, I'm going to get the answer 30. If I take the number 7 and I multiply it by 6, I'm going to get the total 42. And if I take the number 8 and multiply it by 6, I'm going to get the number 48. So now I have to think about the inverse, which is going from my beads back to my stones. So I'm going to draw another arrow that leaves the beads, the total number, and goes back to the stones. And the hard part is over, because now that I know that the rule is 6, I just have to think about what is the inverse action of times 6. Well, the inverse action is divide by 6. So if I have 12 and I divide it by 6, I'll get 2. If I have 18 and I divide by 6, I'll get 3. If I have 30 and I divide by 6, I'm going to get 5. If I have 42 and I divide by 6, I'm going to get 7. And if I have the number 48 and I divide by 6, I'm going to get the answer 8. Okay, boys and girls, so now we're going to take these sentences and we're going to turn them into equations. So I'm going to model for you a couple of these, and then I'm going to let you finish the information by yourself. So at the top it says the number of stones is half the number of beads. So I'm going to start off by underlining number of stones. And when I go up to the top, we're going to write our variable for number of stones, which is S. Every time I see the word is, I'm going to think of that as my equal sign. So I'm going to write equals. And then I'm going to think about what half is. So if I go back to my notes from yesterday and I think about the word half, I believe we put in our notes yesterday that half would equal divide by 2. Just like we have here. 1/2 means divide by 2. So I'm going to go back to my paper and I'm going to think about dividing by 2. What is it that I'm going to be dividing by 2? I'm going to divide the number of beads. So that would be B. Now what I need to do is I need to plug in this information with some numbers to see if it's true or not. So if I plug in, let's take 5, because 5 is pretty easy. Or you know what, let's take the number 2. If I take the number 2 and I substitute it for S equals, instead of the number B, I'm going to put the number 12 because 12 goes with 2. 12 divided by 2 by, divided in half, will I get this number? So let's think about that for a minute. If I take the number 12 and I divide it in half, will I get 2 as my answer? And I don't think that that's going to work. So I'm going to say this is false. Because if I take the number 12 and I divide it by 2, I should get 6 as my answer, not the number 2. Okay, so let's try that again with the next statement. The next statement says the number of stones. So again, I'm going to start with S, number of stones. I see the word equals. We're going to write equals. Double. When I see the word double, what does the word double mean? Double means 2 times. So I'm going to replace the word double with 2 times the number of beads. So I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to write B for beads. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the numbers to see if it's true or false. So I'm going to start with number of stones. So I'm going to keep the number 2. And that's going to be what we're using. 2 is equal. We're going to keep 2 times. 2 times. And instead of B, we're going to put the number 12 here. Well, let's think about that. If I take 2 and I multiply it by 12, will I get 2 as my answer? No. That is also going to be false. Let's look at the next example. The next example says the number of beads. So this time, instead of writing the number of stones, we want the number of beads. So I'm going to start with my variable of B. I see the word is, so I'm going to replace it with equals. I'm going to think about 6 times, and I'm actually going to write it just like that. 6 times the number of stones. And instead of writing the number of stones, I'm going to use the variable S. Now what I need to do is I need to plug that in and see if it's true. So I'm going to use those same numbers that we've been using before. So instead of B, I'm going to write the number 12. Equals. Then we have the number 6 times. 6 times. And then we want to replace it with the number of stones. And that number that we're going to use is the number 2. Let's see if that's true. 2 times 6 equals 12. Is that true or false? That's right. This time it's a true statement. Let's look at the next one. The next one says the number of beads. So again, We're going to start with B for beads, is for equal, 3 times the number of stones. So this time, what I'm going to let you do is I'm going to let you pause the video and see if you can come up with the number sentence on your own. That would be replacing each variable with the appropriate number and then deciding if it's true or false. Once you've completed it, continue the video to see if you're correct. So hopefully you were able to come up with this information. Instead of B, you wrote the number 12. You kept your equal sign. You kept 3 times. And instead of the letter S, you replaced it with the number 2. And then you repeated back. 2 times 3 equals 12. And hopefully you know that this is a false statement. Okay, we have one more to do. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to help you by writing out the information, and you're going to plug it in and decide if it's true or false. So let's start with the number of stones. So we're back to stones coming first. So we're going to start with S. Is, every time I see is, I'm going to replace it with equal. The number of beads, I'm going to use the variable beads, divided by 6. Now pause the video, replace the variables with the numbers that we've been using, and then play the video to see if yours is correct. Okay. Hopefully you're able to come up with this information. The number of stones is 2. Is, the number of beads, the total number of beads would be 12, divided by 6. So let's ask ourselves, if we have 12 and we divide it by 6, will we get 2 as our answer? That's right. That is a true statement. So make sure for each one of these you have 3 things. You have a statement in which you're using variables. You have a statement, an equation, which replaces the variable with a number. And then you have a true and a false for each one. At the bottom, we're going to write 2 relationship statements. And this will help you with the back, which you're going to do mostly independent. Let's start. 2 equations. So when I look at the number of stones and I multiply it by 6, I should get the number B. So let's write that out. Stones times 6 equals total number of beads. Let's turn that around. If we start with the number of beads and we divide by 6, we should get the number of stones. Okay, boys and girls, the next thing I'd like you to do is turn it over to the other side. Before you even start to look at the number sentences that are provided, I'd like you to take a look at the ticket prices and notice any relationships that you see. I'll be back for video 2.